Toronto added 1.5 million people in 20 years. Its subway barely grew by a single stop. The result, a city slowly choking on its own success, gridlock, crumbling stations, and $6 billion evaporating annually in lost economic productivity. Now, the government is committing $50 billion to fix it, but in a country with a pattern of late, over-budget megaprojects, can they actually deliver? To understand what's breaking in Toronto, you first need to understand who's responsible for fixing it. The TTC, the Toronto Transit Commission, operates the city's subways, buses, and streetcars. Roughly 1.7 million people depend on it every single weekday. Above the TTC sits Metrolinx, the provincial agency that plans and builds the major infrastructure. These two bodies don't always agree, and that tension, stretched over decades, is a core reason Toronto finds itself here. Here is the number that stops most people cold. Toronto's subway covers just 77 kilometers of track. Berlin, a city of similar population, operates 155 kilometers. Madrid runs 293. Sydney in Australia recently overtook Toronto in metro coverage. A G7 nation's largest city, ranked behind Sydney for rapid transit reach. So how did this happen? Three forces shaped everything. Political cancellations that erased decades of planning overnight, a suburban sprawl model that made dense transit economically unviable across vast parts of the city, and a succession of governments more comfortable making transit announcements than actually building transit. The most brutal example, the Eglinton subway planned in the early 1990s. Construction actually began. Workers dug the tunnels. Then, in 1995, the newly elected provincial government canceled the project overnight. The tunnels were filled back in with concrete. 20 years of planning, buried. The city would spend the next 2 decades trying to undo that single decision. But here's what most people miss. The real turning point didn't come from inside Toronto. It came from Queen's Park. Stretching 19 kilometers across the midsection of Toronto, the Eglinton Crosstown LRT is, on paper, transformational. When operating, it will carry up to 44,000 passengers per hour in both directions, more than many subway lines in smaller European cities. Underground, through the dense urban core, surfacing to dedicated above-ground lanes in the east and west. A city sliced in half, finally stitched together. Construction was awarded to Crosslinx Transit Solutions in 2015. The original schedule promised the line running by 2021. That date came and went. So did 2022, then 2023, then 2024. As of 2025, the line sat silent, fully built, fully equipped, but not a single revenue passenger had ridden it. What went wrong? The tunneling beneath Eglinton Avenue hit ground conditions more complex than modeled. Unexpected utility conflicts, water mains, gas lines, fiber cables, forced constant rerouting underground. Then COVID-19 halted construction for months, shattering supply chains and driving material costs upward. Each delay compounded the last. But the most damaging problem wasn't in the tunnels, it was in systems integration. After the physical infrastructure was largely complete, getting the trains, signals, power systems, and safety technology to communicate became a multi-year ordeal. Metrolinx and Crosslinx entered arbitration. Legal proceedings began. Blame shifted back and forth. Whilst the public watched the most expensive transit project in Canadian history sit idle, costing approximately $3 million per day in carrying costs alone. Think about that for a second. A line that will eventually carry the equivalent of a motorway's worth of daily traffic, sitting empty, stations built, tracks laid, trains parked, just waiting. The human cost isn't measured in legal fees. It's measured in the millions of commuters who have navigated one of the world's most congested urban corridors for 5 additional years without relief. When it does open, the crosstown will redefine travel times across the city's entire middle band, connecting Mount Dennis in the west to Kennedy Station in the east, a journey that currently takes well over an hour by surface transit. The Eglinton Crosstown is not just a transit project, it is a test, and its outcome will define public confidence in everything that follows. In 2019, the provincial government made a decision that surprised almost everyone in the transit planning community. They scrapped the existing relief line, a project that had spent years in environmental assessments, public consultations, and engineering studies.
entirely new. They called it the Ontario Line.
The Ontario Line is a 15.6-kilometer rapid transit corridor with 15 stations running from Exhibition in the west through the downtown core, northeast to the Ontario Science Centre. Its projected capacity is 30,000 passengers per hour per direction, comparable to a heavy rail subway. Its projected opening date is 2031. Why was the relief line abandoned for a new route? The government argued the Ontario line would serve more people, cost less per kilometer, and open sooner. Critics argued years of planning were wasted, that the new route skipped critical high-density areas, and that above-ground routing would cause disruption rather than solve it. Both sides had a point. A significant portion of the Ontario Line was designed to run elevated through densely built residential and commercial neighborhoods in the East End. The communities affected pushed back hard. Noise, visual intrusion, shadow effects. The tunnel versus above-ground debate isn't merely aesthetic. It is financial. Tunneling through dense urban rock costs $300 to $500 million per kilometer. Above-ground costs a fraction of that. But here's what most people miss about the Ontario Line tunneling challenge. Toronto's geology presents a mixture of dense shale and fractured rock formations beneath the downtown core. Unlike London or New York, where centuries of underground construction have produced comprehensive geological maps, Toronto's deep underground is still revealing surprises with every meter drilled. The Ontario Line tunnels must thread beneath active GO transit corridors, existing TTC subway lines, and the foundation footings of some of the city's most significant buildings. Every meter forward requires engineering precision that goes far beyond standard subway construction. There is no margin for error when you are tunneling beneath a live city. If you're finding this breakdown useful, subscribe now. We are building out a full North America infrastructure series, and the next video is something you will not want to miss. Subscribe so you don't miss it. 13 stations threading through some of the fastest-growing and most transit-stressed neighborhoods in the city. The Ontario Line's projected 2031 opening represents one of the most aggressive transit construction timelines in Canadian history. Whether that date holds will depend on one thing above all others: whether the lessons of the Eglinton Crosstown systems integration nightmare have actually been absorbed. The Ontario Line and Eglinton Crosstown are the headline acts, but running alongside them, at various stages of planning and construction, are three further expansions that will fundamentally reshape how specific communities connect to the rest of the city. First, the Scarborough Subway Extension. This project replaces the aging Scarborough RT, a one-line, three-station elevated rail system built in 1985. Now so maintenance-intensive it's cheaper to replace it entirely than keep it running. The extension adds 3 stops beyond Kennedy Station, running northeast into Scarborough Centre. For a community that has long felt underserved by transit investment, this line carries considerable symbolic weight alongside its practical value. The RT was decommissioned ahead of schedule in 2023, its deterioration accelerating faster than engineers projected. Buses are now running replacement service. For tens of thousands of Scarborough residents, that replacement is a daily reminder of how long infrastructure decisions take to translate into infrastructure reality. They have been waiting for this subway extension, in various forms, since the 1980s. The Yonge North Subway Extension will add 5 new stations north of Finch, extending the existing Yonge University line from Finch through York Region to Richmond Hill Centre. This extension is unique. It crosses a municipal boundary, serving not just Toronto proper but the regional municipalities of York Region. Funding involves contributions from 3 levels of government and York Region itself. Its projected opening sits around 2031. Finally, Finch West, LRT. 11 kilometers from Humber College in the west to Finch West Station. The Finch West corridor has some of the highest transit usage rates in the entire Greater Toronto Area, and some of the lowest car ownership rates. It is, in the most direct sense, essential transit for people with no alternative. Its projected opening date of 2026 would make it the first of this generation of megaprojects to actually cross the finish line. Everything covered to this point is a construction story. What we have not yet addressed is a governance story, because the question hanging over every one of these $50 billion worth of projects is the same question that has followed Canadian infrastructure for 30 years. Can this country actually deliver? The data is not encouraging. A Fraser Institute analysis of major Canadian infrastructure projects found an average cost overrun of 40% above original budgets. For transit specifically, the figure is worse. The Eglinton Crosstown began at a projected $5 billion. It now sits at $12.5 billion, and counting. That is a 250% increase. The Ottawa Confederation Line, a rapid transit system that opened late, broke down repeatedly, and is now the subject of a public inquiry, is a cautionary tale every Metrolinx engineer will have memorized. Compare this to cities that have actually delivered. Singapore's mass rapid transit expanded 3 new lines between 2009 and 2020, all on time, all within 5% of original budgets. Copenhagen built the City Ringen Loop, a fully automated metro through dense urban geology, and opened it 6 months ahead of schedule. The common thread, institutional continuity, the same technical leadership, through the same procurement methodology, over multi-decade timescales. No cancellations, no political restarts. Toronto's fundamental problem is not engineering capability. Canadian engineers are world-class. The problem is the political cycle. Infrastructure at this scale takes 15 to 20 years from concept to opening. Canadian governments at every level change, cancel, restart, and rebrand transit projects to suit 4-year electoral cycles. Each restart costs years, each cancellation costs billions. The city pays the price in gridlock. But here's what most people miss about where Toronto actually stands right now. Unlike every previous generation of transit promises, these projects exist. The steel is in the ground, the tunnels are being bored, the contracts are signed. The era of cancellation, at least for this generation of projects, appears to be over. The political cost of stopping now would be catastrophic. For the first time in Toronto's transit history, the momentum is real. What success looks like by 2035 is a city genuinely transformed. 5 new lines in operation. Eglinton Crosstown reshaping the corridor as a new commercial spine. The Ontario line relieving downtown pressure building since the 1990s. Scarborough reconnected, the northern suburbs integrated. If even 75% of this program delivers on schedule, Toronto's transit network will more than double in route kilometers within a decade. Cities are not built in election cycles, they are built in generations. The Toronto that emerges on the other side of this $50 billion decade will either vindicate the ambition of everyone who refused to accept a city strangled by its own growth, or it will stand as another cautionary chapter in the long history of infrastructure promised but not delivered. The shovels are in the ground. The question is no longer whether Toronto wants this. The question is whether the institutions responsible have learned enough from their failures to finally get it right. If you want to follow every stage of this transformation, subscribe now. The next video in our North America infrastructure series takes us to a city that faced exactly the same crossroads Toronto faces today, and chose a very different path. You will not want to miss it.